first class. With that hoodie? Sure, sweetheart. That was the last thing she heard, before a federal security badge was torn in half, and the woman, assumed to be just another black passenger in street clothes, called directly to the Department of Homeland Security, triggering Operation Phoenix Zulu. Within 72 hours, a gate agent was arrested for violating federal civil rights. A senior supervisor was indicted for falsifying flight safety records. And a prestigious airline collapsed under the scrutiny of the entire nation. This is a true story about Jordan Myles, a woman dismissed for wearing a hoodie, but who turned out to be the architect behind the largest aviation purge of the decade. Clara thought she was ripping a badge, but what she really tore apart was the mask of an entire system. And now, that system must answer to justice. Watch till the end to find out what happens when you disrespect the wrong person on the right day. First class with that hoodie? Sure, sweetheart. The words slipped from the gate agent's mouth like a slap. No need to raise her voice, just loud enough to make the man behind her chuckle, and the woman in front freeze. A black woman, wearing a gray hoodie, headphones in. She quietly held out her security badge with a calm, practiced patience. She didn't argue. She simply waited for the scan, for the boarding, for the first-class seat she had earned after 12 straight days of classified fieldwork. But instead of scanning the badge, the gate agent, Clara, tore it in half, deliberately, without blinking. A small sound, crack, ripped through the terminal like a silent thunderclap. The federal badge, now in 2 pieces, lay on the counter, like a quiet crime. And in that moment, the woman in the hoodie, the one they thought didn't belong, the one they tried to humiliate, stood tall, no shouting, no tears, because the person just disrespected wasn't just anyone. She was Jordan Myles, lead investigator, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and Clara had just pulled the trigger on a storm. Jordan Myles, 38 years old, one of the few black women ever to hold the title, lead investigator, Department of Homeland Security, and for the past 12 days, she didn't carry power on her shoulders. She carried a cover. At a windowless 3-star hotel, Jordan lived like any ordinary traveler. The late arriver, the chronic complainer, the nervous flyer making her first trip. She observed everything. The scanning systems, staff reactions, emergency protocols, and the shadows where bias hides behind a customer service smile. The undercover operation at Dallas Fort Ridge Airport wasn't a stunt. It was a top-secret assignment, codename Phoenix Zulu, designed to expose the cracks in airport security from the inside out. And today, the mission ended. No suits, no badge, just an old Howard University hoodie, noise-canceling headphones, and a first-class ticket. A small reward for a week buried in 3 a.m. reports. Jordan didn't want applause. She just wanted to be left alone. But prejudice? It never leaves anyone alone. Fort Ridge International looked like a commercial for the future. Gleaming floors, LED lights that shifted colors by the hour, robots that served coffee with a nod. But behind all that polished glass was the soft hiss of prejudice. Jordan moved through the check-in counters like a ghost. No greetings, no eye contact. Unless, of course, you were a white family checking in for first class. Welcome, sir. Smiles bloomed instantly. At gate B-17 stood Clara Jennings, like she owned the place. Blonde hair pressed flat like a helmet, lips tight, eyes sharp as pins. A white family asked about the flight. Clara leaned in, cooing at the toddler, calling them Pumpkin. An elderly Korean man approached, gently inquiring if the flight was delayed. Clara didn't even look up, just snapped, "Listen for the board call, sir." Jordan paused. She had a name for this kind of thing: subtle supremacy. When a name tag and a pitch-perfect voice become tools to rank human worth. At Fort Ridge, politeness was conditional, and that condition didn't include people like Jordan. Jordan held out the QR code on her phone, along with her federal ID. Clara's eyes flicked over the first-class ticket, then locked onto the name in bold, Jordan Myles. Her brow twitched, barely, but enough. Enough contempt to hang in the air like the smell of burnt plastic. Clara lifted the badge under the overhead light, tilting it left, right, then smirked. Jordan Myles? Looking like this? Probably. Fake papers. The words weren't loud, but loud enough for the man behind Jordan to chuckle, and loud enough for a young white girl to tug her mother's hand and whisper, "Why is she being checked so much?" Jordan heard every word, but she didn't react. This wasn't the first time her skin had spoken louder than her resume, nor the first time she'd been hit with a voice that sounded sweet this time, but cut sharp. It wasn't a store, not a restaurant, not a car rental desk. This was a national security checkpoint, and the one throwing insults was the gatekeeper of the system. Clara twirled the federal ID card between her fingers, like it was a piece of trash she'd picked up off the street. Then she leaned in close, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "I'm not letting someone like you board a plane on my watch." And before Jordan could say a word, Clara yanked both ends of the badge. Crack! A cold, brittle sound split the air. Tiny, but it sliced through the terminal like a razor through still wind. Two halves of the security ID dropped onto the counter, the reflective laminate torn. The identification code split down the middle, the federal seal cleaved in two. And suddenly, Gate B-17 fell silent, completely still. Every motion froze. A nearby college student lifted his phone. No words, just pressed record. Clara stood upright, arms crossed, triumphant. Jordan, still motionless, still silent. But her eyes, they weren't the eyes of a passenger anymore. They were the eyes of someone who knew, without a doubt, she had just been violated, and the woman in front of her had just broken federal law. Jordan bent down and picked up the two torn halves of her badge. Her fingers trembled, not from rage, but from the cold surge of adrenaline gripping her awareness like a vice. Clara let out a smug little laugh. Jordan pulled out her phone. She didn't dial 911. She didn't call customer service. She opened her contacts, tapped one single name: Evans, DHS Director. The phone rang. Once. Evans speaking. Phoenix Zulu, activated at Fort Ridge. Gate B-17. Security compromised. Level 1 federal violation. Request immediate deployment. Her voice was cold, precise, like a sword slicing through a briefing room table. No need for introductions. At Jordan's clearance level, a code name was all it took to set the system in motion. By the time she ended the call, Clara still had no idea what had just begun. And Jordan? She was no longer a passenger. She had stepped back into her true role: lead investigator, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And Clara had just become the primary subject in a classified emergency investigation. Case ID ZX47 Phoenix Zulu. Less than 4 minutes after the call, strange things began happening at Fort Ridge. In the control room, the main screen flashed red. Phoenix Zulu. Active. Every airport security camera switched to live-locked storage. Undeletable, untouchable. Fingerprint logs, scan records, staff badge activity. Every move Clara Jennings had made in the past 72 hours was retrieved instantly. All surveillance feeds at Gate B-17 were now rerouted directly to the Federal Security Analysis Center. Outside, passengers began to sense something was off. No one was being called to board. The name display system froze. 2 security officers appeared, but they weren't wearing Skyrise uniforms. They wore tactical black vests with TSA badges, Tactical Federal Response. Then a voice echoed through the PA system, cold, steady, unmistakable. All operations at Gate B-17 are temporarily suspended. This area is now a federal investigation site. The student who had been filming still had his phone at his side, camera rolling. No one around them realized. They were now standing in the middle of a classified federal takedown. No one, except Jordan, and she was ready to drag the entire system into the light. While passengers stood waiting in confusion, the federal investigation team had already begun their work, right there, on Clara's own terminal. Her internal access was locked. 6 months of activity, extracted in seconds, and then the truth began to unfold, line by line. Clara Jennings wasn't just a gate agent. She was the unofficial gatekeeper of an entire system, someone with the power to flag any passenger deemed unfit to fly. And the most chilling part? 90% of those flags targeted people of color, Black, Asian, or anyone with a foreign-sounding last name. Whenever Clara saw a name she didn't like, she didn't need a reason. She marked it possible fraud and took action, bumping passengers from first class, delaying check-ins, or sending them off for additional screening, all under the guise of security, all backed by the quiet authority of a laminated name tag. But this time, it wasn't just discrimination, it was evidence. And in front of the federal team, Clara Jennings was no longer a gate agent. She was now a suspect. As the investigation team combed through internal data, a third call came through to the temporary command center, this time from New Jersey. The caller, civil rights attorney Amira Saleh. Her voice was tight but firm. "We're representing Mr. Nadim El Sayed, an American citizen of Egyptian descent. 3 weeks ago, he was detained for 5 hours without cause at a Skyrise gate. The gate agent responsible, Clara Jennings Jordan, snapped her head around, wasn't unfamiliar. She had seen it before during her undercover work. A respected businessman with a spotless travel record, suddenly flagged as high risk after just 1 flight through Fort Ridge. That phone call ripped away any lingering doubt. This wasn't personal misconduct. Clara Jennings wasn't just profiling at one airport. She was a link in a chain of interstate civil rights violations. That very night, the Department of Homeland Security expanded the investigation nationwide. No one could have imagined that a black woman in a hoodie, publicly humiliated at a boarding gate, would become the spark that ignited the largest exposé of systemic discrimination in a decade. As investigators traced Clara's internal account, they stumbled upon a technical maintenance folder, one she had no clearance to access. Jordan, holding the highest authority under Operation Phoenix Zulu, ordered a full data extraction. And then, the real bomb dropped. Dozens of technical maintenance reports were marked completed, signed off by employees who were on vacation, some even out of the country in Mexico at the time. Every report included a green stamp, maintenance complete, flight safe. But the components listed had never even been opened. One report stood out. Veteran pilot Captain L. Browning had filed a formal complaint about abnormal vibrations in the left engine during Flight 924. He logged it in his flight journal, citing a risk of engine failure. That report had been stamped in red. Subjective. Disregarded. Jordan stared at the screen, frozen. Clara was just the tip of the iceberg. What needed investigating now was a system that buried technical failures, dismissed safety concerns, and fabricated the illusion of airworthiness. Because if this hadn't been caught today, what would have happened tomorrow? 10,000 meters in the air. Jordan ordered a full extraction of passenger data from the past 6 months. Names redacted, filtered only by ethnicity, seat assignment, and security screening status. And the numbers dropped like a bomb in the war room. Passengers of color were subjected to additional screening 7 times more than white passengers, with no technical justification. Latino families booking tickets together were split into separate seats 64% of the time, especially when traveling with small children. Passengers with disabilities, particularly those using walkers or prosthetic limbs, were consistently deboarded last and often received no proper assistance from gate staff. Then the screen lit up with a heat map. Each red dot marked a violation, and nearly all of them clustered around a single location: Fort Ridge branch. Jordan rose to her feet. Her gaze swept across the data. This is no longer about individual misconduct. This is a system, one that selects and excludes based on skin color and body condition. And now, that system was about to be exposed. A VIP lounge once reserved for Skyrise Air's first-class elite was now the emergency command center of a full-blown federal investigation. Jordan didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood in the center of the room, surrounded by monitors, data streams, and a task force made up of Homeland Security and TSA investigators. The official directive, Fort Ridge branch, sealed, subject to federal inquiry. Everything moved in silence, but with zero leniency. Clara Jennings's personal email was fully decrypted, and what emerged was a string of messages soaked in undeniable prejudice. They fake it all the time. I'm just doing what's right. If they look suspicious, I don't need the system. My gut knows. Can't stand the ones in hoodies, acting all humble but with that smug face. Jordan read each line. No interpretation needed. Racism was no longer hiding behind procedure. It was laid bare, in the unfiltered voice of a gate agent, and worse, tacitly accepted by the system she worked within. Operation Phoenix Zulu had officially launched, and it wouldn't stop at Clara. Skyrise leadership was next. As Clara's records were examined in detail, one name kept surfacing in the reply threads: Frank Turner, her direct supervisor. Jordan ordered an immediate scan of Frank's internal inbox. Within 10 minutes, the investigation team uncovered a damning email chain. One message, in particular, stood out. Sent from Frank to Clara, 3 months prior. Keep a close eye on the colored ones. Just don't leave a trail. It's not racism, it's proactive screening. 2 lines. But they hit like a sledgehammer, shattering every layer of corporate denial. Frank didn't just know, he directed it. He encouraged Clara to flag passengers based on gut instinct, to profile, discriminate, and disguise it all under the label of technical concern. In the makeshift interrogation room, Jordan sat across from him. She slid the printed email across the table, then looked up, locking eyes with the man who once held power. Her voice was sharp. Steady. You taught them how to do it wrong. Frank went pale. Gone was the commanding supervisor. What remained was a man who knew he was about to lose everything for defending racism under the excuse of being proactive. This was no longer a localized investigation. With irrefutable evidence, from emails and profiling records to falsified maintenance reports, Jordan issued the command: suspend all flight operations linked to the Fort Ridge branch. Nearly 200 crew members, technicians, and coordinators were pulled from duty, moved to investigative support status. 12 flights canceled. The entire Skyrise global network shook. Homeland Security's Emergency Command Center dispatched official notices to 4 major Skyrise hubs: Chicago, Miami, Seattle, and Denver, regions where similar misconduct was now suspected. "This is no longer about individual wrongdoing," Jordan declared at an emergency press briefing. "This is a system, powered by bias and protected by silence." The media flooded in. Headlines hit fast. Skyrise airline accused of racial profiling and safety violations. A torn badge exposes a broken system. Clara thought she had denied boarding to one passenger. In reality, she had triggered a reckoning for an entire industry. On the third day of the operation, with media swarming the perimeter of Fort Ridge Airport, Clara Jennings was led out of the interrogation room in handcuffs. Still in her Skyrise uniform, but her name tag was gone. She wasn't just arrested for tearing a federal security badge. She now faced a far more serious charge: systemic violation of federal civil rights through racial discrimination. The federal prosecutor stepped forward. The defendant used her professional authority to discriminate, humiliate, and suppress the freedoms of U.S. citizens, based solely on skin color and ethnic origin. Not long after, Frank Turner was arrested at his home. The charges against him: falsifying official aviation safety records, concealing and silencing complaints of discrimination, aiding and abetting subordinate racial profiling, one badge torn, 2 careers destroyed, and now both were face to face with justice. But Jordan knew this was just the tip of the iceberg, because what needed to be exposed wasn't just 2 individuals. It was the entire system that enabled and protected their abuse, all in the name of procedure. 2 weeks after the incident at Gate B-17, a 412-page investigative report was delivered to Congress, signed by Jordan Myles and the Director of Homeland Security. Skyrise Global Airlines, once a prestigious name in luxury air travel, was now the emblem of corporate ethical collapse. With undeniable evidence of systemic racial discrimination, falsified technical safety reports, and years of concealed passenger complaints, Skyrise was hit with a $2.4 billion fine, the largest civil penalty in U.S. aviation history. But it didn't stop there. The airline's operating license was revoked in 3 states: Texas, Illinois, and Florida. And it was placed under federal oversight for 7 years, monitored by an independent audit board appointed by the Department of Justice. The Skyrise CEO appeared on national television, face stiff, voice cracking. "We sincerely apologize for allowing this to happen. But apologies can't rebuild a brand built on bias and maintained through silence." The collapse began with a torn badge and ended with an empire in ruins. Just hours after the investigation erupted, a 57-second video clip capturing the moment Clara ripped Jordan's federal ID went viral across the country. The footage froze at the exact frame, Clara's lips pressed tight, her hands yanking, the badge tearing clean in half beneath the airport lights. Jordan stood still. Her eyes shifted from restraint to steel. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed an emergency number. No dialogue, no background music, just a look. And all of America understood exactly what had happened. The person behind the camera? Layla Thompson, a third-year law student at Georgia State, suddenly became the face of citizen justice. Layla was invited to speak on CNN, NBC, and forums on racial justice. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just raised my phone and didn't look away. But sometimes, that's the only way to protect the truth." The clip has since been adopted as teaching material on the right to film in public spaces and stands as a symbol of the power of living evidence. The Senate hearing room fell completely silent as Jordan Myles stepped up to the podium. Gone was the charcoal hoodie. Gone was the quiet figure at Gate B-17. Standing before the full Homeland Security Committee, Jordan wore a crisp navy blue suit, a polished nameplate, and an expression both calm and unshakably resolute. After presenting the findings, the profiling statistics, the hundreds of violations, the millions of passengers affected, directly into the camera broadcasting live across America. Bigotry doesn't just hurt feelings. In aviation, it kills trust, and eventually, it kills people. A heavy silence swept over the chamber. Jordan continued. An airport gate isn't just where we check tickets. It's where America decides who gets to move forward and who gets held back. That day, I was treated as someone who didn't belong. But the truth is, I was sent to find out whether this system still deserves to. She bowed her head gently. Applause followed. Not out of ceremony, but because someone had finally called the truth by its name. Immediately following the Senate hearing, the Department of Homeland Security officially approved Jordan's proposal, Blind Audit Protocol, an internal inspection program with no advance notice, no visible credentials, and no exemptions. Each quarter, airport security gates across major U.S. cities would be visited by another Jordan, in plain clothes, with no rank, no business card, but armed with full authority to knock on the door of any hidden violation. This wasn't reform on paper. This was justice, spoken out loud. Passengers once targeted by Clara Jennings, from Mr. El Sayed in New Jersey to Mrs. Martinez, who'd been split from her son, were invited to Skyrise headquarters for a public apology before the press. Many wept, not over compensation, but because for the first time, someone looked them in the eye and said, "I believe you were wronged, and it will not be ignored." Jordan didn't stand in that room. She was elsewhere, quietly preparing for the next mission, because battling a broken system is never just one fight. The day Jordan left Fort Ridge, there were no reporters, no camera lights, no headlines. She wore the same gray hoodie, headphones on, walking quietly past the very terminal that had become the center of a national reckoning. But this time, no one dared look at her with suspicion. A security officer nodded respectfully. A black passenger holding his child's hand whispered softly, "Thank you for standing up for all of us." Somewhere, Clara still believed she had only torn a badge, but in truth, she had ripped open the disguise of an entire system, a system where prejudice hid behind protocol, and silence was disguised as procedure. And Jordan, the woman once dismissed for wearing a hoodie, was now the one rewriting the rules of flight for an entire nation. Her name now appears in aviation training manuals. Her words are etched across the main wall of the U.S. Transportation Security Administration. Security doesn't start with scanners. It starts with how we see each other. And one day, when someone wearing a hoodie stands at the front of the line, they won't be looked down on. They'll be remembered. Because Jordan Myles walked there first. Jordan Myles didn't reclaim justice with her fists. She didn't need to shout. She didn't grab a camera. She didn't demand special treatment. She simply stood, calm, precise, and unapologetically unwilling to excuse what was wrong. And it was that very calm that brought an entire industry to its knees. The badge that was torn wasn't just an insult. It was the final crack in a system used to abusing power and believing no one would ever push back. But this time, they picked the wrong one, the very wrong one, because the woman in that hoodie was the one who rewrote the national security screening protocols from the ground up. Security doesn't start with scanners. It starts with how we see each other and how we treat each other. If you've ever been judged for what you wear, for the color of your skin, or for the name on your ID, Remember the name Jordan Myles. Because of her, every passenger who walks through that gate will no longer walk with their head down. They'll be seen. They'll be respected. Exactly as they deserve.